The stars looked cold and empty through the bridge windows of the UES Defiance. Commander Jake Morrison stood with his hands behind his back, watching the enemy ships grow larger on the main screen. There were so many of them. Too many. "Sir, we're getting reports from the outer defenses," Lieutenant Lisa Grant said from her station. Her voice was steady, but Jake could hear the fear underneath. "The Zephyrian fleet broke through the asteroid belt defenses 12 minutes ago. They're heading straight for us." Jake nodded but didn't turn around. He had seen this same scene play out dozens of times over the past 3 years. Human ships fighting bravely, following all the rules of space warfare that every civilized species in the galaxy followed, and losing. Always losing. The Zephyrians were simply better at everything. Their ships moved faster, hit harder, and never seemed to make mistakes. They fought like machines, perfectly coordinated and utterly efficient. Every battle followed the same pattern. The humans would form their defensive lines, the Zephyrians would analyze their positions, and then the enemy would attack with mathematical precision. "How many ships do they have this time?" Jake asked. 247 confirmed contacts, Lisa replied. "Our scouts report they're bringing their new plasma destroyers, the ones that took out the colony at New Mars." Jake finally turned around. His bridge crew looked at him with hope in their eyes, even though they all knew the truth. The human fleet had 31 ships left. That was all. Everything else had been destroyed or was too damaged to fight. "Send word to Admiral Stone," Jake said. "Tell her we'll hold the line as long as we can." On Earth, the news was even worse. Dr. Benjamin Clark stood in the Emergency Council chambers, looking at the faces of humanity's leaders. They all knew what he was about to tell them, but someone had to say it out loud. "The math is simple," Dr. Clark began. "We've lost every major battle for the past 18 months. Our ships are outnumbered 8-1. Their technology is superior, in every way that matters. By any reasonable calculation, we cannot win this war." President Robert Hayes leaned forward in his chair. "What are our options, Doctor?" "We have 3 choices," Dr. Clark replied. "We can surrender and hope the Zephyrians show mercy. We can fight and die with honor. Or we can evacuate as many people as possible and try to start over somewhere else." The room fell silent. Outside the windows, people were going about their daily lives, not knowing that their world was about to end. Children played in parks while their parents worked in offices and factories. None of them knew that alien ships were racing toward Earth, carrying enough firepower to turn their planet into a ball of burning rock. Admiral Patricia Stone sat in her command center, watching the tactical displays that showed the approaching enemy fleet. She had been fighting the Zephyrians longer than anyone else still alive. She had watched them destroy entire colonies with cold efficiency. She had seen their ships slice through human defenses like they weren't even there. The worst part was how predictable it all was. The Zephyrians followed the same patterns every time. They would scan the human positions, calculate the most efficient attack routes, and then execute their plan with perfect timing. It was like fighting a computer that never made errors. "Ma'am," her aide said quietly, "we're receiving a transmission from the Zephyrian command ship." "Put it through," Admiral Stone replied. The screen filled with the image of War Commander Thekmor, the alien leader who had been crushing human resistance for 3 years. His species looked almost human, except for their silver skin and completely black eyes. He wore the dark uniform of the Zephyrian military, decorated with symbols that marked his many victories. "Admiral Stone," Thekmor said in perfect English. His voice was calm and emotionless. "I offer you the same terms I've offered every human commander. Surrender now, and your people will be relocated to designated areas. They will be treated fairly according to galactic law. Continue to resist, and we will be forced to use more direct methods." Admiral Stone stared back at the alien commander. "And if we surrender, what happens to humanity?" "Your species will be integrated into the Empire," Thekmor replied. "You will be given work assignments suitable to your abilities. Your children will be educated in proper galactic civilization. In time, your people will forget their primitive ways and become productive members of the Empire." The transmission ended, leaving Admiral Stone alone with her thoughts. She had heard these same words before. on other worlds that had fallen to the Zephyrians. She knew what integration really meant. It meant the end of everything that made humans human. Back. On the UES Defiance, Jake Morrison received a message that made him pause. It came from Dr. Helen Torres, a woman he had never heard of. She worked at the University on Earth studying old human cultures and history. Her message was short and strange. "Commander Morrison," the message began. "My name is Helen Torres. I'm an anthropologist, not a soldier. But I've been studying this war and I think we're making a mistake. We're fighting by their rules, using their methods. What if we stopped doing that? What if we fought like humans instead of trying to be better Zephyrians? Please contact me if you get this message. I have ideas." Jake read the message twice. It didn't make much sense. How else were they supposed to fight? There were rules to space warfare, protocols that every civilized species followed. You formed battle lines, you protected your important ships, you tried to outmaneuver your enemy using proven tactics. That was how wars were fought. But those tactics weren't working. They had never worked against the Zephyrians. "Sir?" Lisa Grant called out. "The enemy fleet is entering weapons range. They're forming their standard attack pattern." Jake looked at the main screen. The Zephyrian ships were moving into position with mechanical precision. In 15 minutes, they would begin their attack. The human ships would fight back using every trick they knew, and then they would lose, just like every time before. "Sir, what are your orders?" Lisa asked. Jake thought about Dr. Torres and her strange message. What did she mean by fighting like humans? What else was there? "Form defensive line Echo 7, Jake ordered. It was the standard formation, the one that military academies taught to every officer. "All ships, prepare for battle." The Zephyrian attack began exactly on schedule. Their ships moved forward in perfect coordination, their weapons firing in calculated patterns. The human ships fought back with everything they had, but it wasn't enough. It was never enough. As the UES Defiance shook under enemy fire, Jake watched his tactical display show the same story that had been told dozens of times before. Human ships disappearing one by one, overwhelmed by superior numbers and better technology. But in the back of his mind, he kept thinking about Dr. Torres and her message. Fighting like humans. What did that even mean? The battle raged for 2 hours. When it ended, only 12 human ships remained. The Zephyrians had lost 3 vessels, which was actually considered a good result for the human side. As the enemy fleet prepared for its final approach to Earth, Jake Morrison made a decision that would change everything. He opened a communication channel to the planet below. "Dr. Helen Torres," he said into the microphone. "This is Commander Morrison. I got your message. I think it's time we had a talk." Dr. Helen Torres stood in front of the emergency council, her hands shaking slightly as she held her tablet. She had never spoken to such important people before. Around the table sat the leaders of humanity, all looking tired and desperate. They had agreed to listen to her only because they had run out of other options. "I study how humans lived and fought in the past," Helen began. "Before we had spaceships and energy weapons. Before we knew there were rules about how civilized species were supposed to fight wars." President Hayes looked impatient. "Dr. Torres, we don't have much time. The Zephyrian fleet will reach Earth in 6 days. What exactly are you suggesting?" Helen touched her tablet and a holographic display appeared above the table. It showed images from Earth's history, ancient battles, old weapons, soldiers from different time periods. "Look at these battles," Helen said. "Humans fighting against bigger, stronger enemies. We didn't win because we were better soldiers or had better weapons. We won because we refused to fight fair." Admiral Stone frowned. "What do you mean by not fighting fair?" "There are galactic laws about warfare, rules that every civilized species follows." "But what if those rules are exactly why we keep losing?" Helen asked. "The Zephyrians are better than us at following the rules. Their computers can calculate the perfect attack patterns. They know exactly where to put their ships and when to fire their weapons. They're like chess masters and we're trying to beat them at chess." Dr. Clark leaned forward. "So what do you propose? That we cheat?" "I propose that we change the game," Helen replied. "Look at this battle. The display showed a scene from ancient Earth history. A small group of fighters hid in the forest and attacked supply wagons. They didn't meet the enemy army in open battle. They made the enemy afraid to travel alone. Guerrilla warfare, Admiral Stone said quietly. Hit-and-run tactics. Exactly, Helen said. And look at this one. The display changed to show another historical scene. The defenders were outnumbered 10-1, so they pretended to retreat, led the enemy into a trap, and destroyed them with an avalanche. President Hayes shook his head. These are interesting history lessons, Dr. Torres, but we're fighting in space. How do you hide in a forest when there are no trees? Helen smiled for the first time since entering the room. Space is actually perfect for this kind of fighting. It's huge and dark and full of places to hide. Asteroid fields, gas clouds, the shadow sides of planets. The Zephyrians fight like they're on a chessboard, but space isn't a chessboard. Meanwhile, Captain Danny Brooks was already putting some of these ideas to work, though he didn't know it yet. His ship, the UES Shadow, was designed for reconnaissance missions. It was small, fast, and very hard to see on enemy sensors. Danny had been watching the Zephyrian fleet for 3 days, staying far enough away to avoid detection. What he saw confused him. The alien ships moved in perfect formations, never deviating from their planned routes. Their patrol patterns were so regular that Danny could predict exactly where each ship would be at any given time. Sergeant Price, he called to his demolitions expert. Look at this, these guys follow the same schedule every day. Their supply ships leave the main fleet at exactly the same time, take the same route, and return at the same time. Kelly Price studied the data. It's like they're robots, sir. No human commander would be that predictable. That's what I was thinking, Danny said. Tim, can you intercept their communications? Corporal Tim Walsh, their communications specialist, worked at his console for several minutes. I'm getting something, sir. It looks like they're battle plans. They're not even encrypted very well. Danny couldn't believe what he was hearing. The Zephyrians were so confident in their superiority that they barely bothered to hide their plans. Their computers calculated the most efficient way to do everything, and they followed those calculations exactly. Kelly, Danny said slowly. What would happen if someone put a bomb on one of their supply ships? Depends on what the ship was carrying, sir. If it was ammunition or fuel, it would make a very big explosion. Danny made a decision that would change the course of the war. Tim, send a message to Admiral Stone. Tell her we've found a weakness. Back on Earth, Helen Torres was having a hard time convincing the Council. Most of them thought her ideas were too dangerous or wouldn't work in space. You're talking about terrorism, one Council member said. Attacking supply lines, using tricks and deception. That's not how civilized species fight wars. The Zephyrians aren't civilized, Helen replied. They're conquerors. They've destroyed dozens of other species using these same civilized rules. Maybe it's time we stopped being so civilized. Admiral Stone received Danny Brooks' message just as the council meeting was ending. She read it twice, then called Helen. Torres aside. Dr. Torres, the Admiral said quietly. I think you might be on to something. We just received intelligence that confirms what you're saying. The enemy follows patterns so rigid that we can predict their movements. Helen's eyes lit up. Then we can use that against them. But we need to start thinking completely differently about how we fight. What do you need? Admiral Stone asked. I need to talk to people who know how to break rules, Helen said. Criminals, maybe. People who think outside the law. And I need access to our military files, especially the ones about unconventional warfare. Admiral Stone nodded. I'll make some calls. Within hours, Helen found herself in a room with some very unusual people. There was Ray Thompson, a former Special Forces soldier, who had been court-martialed for using unauthorized tactics. Nina Foster, a computer expert who had once been arrested for hacking government systems, and several others with similar backgrounds. I know this sounds crazy, Helen told them, but I want you to forget everything you know about proper military tactics. I want you to think like criminals and troublemakers. How would you fight an enemy that's bigger and stronger than you? Ray Thompson smiled grimly. Ma'am, I've been waiting my whole career for someone to ask me that question. They worked through the night, developing plans that would have horrified any traditional military commander. Instead of meeting the enemy in open battle, they would strike at supply lines and communication relays. Instead of protecting their own ships, they would make them look damaged and helpless to lure enemy vessels into traps. The key is to make them react instead of having them plan, Nina explained. Their computers are very good at solving problems they've seen before. But if we do something completely unexpected, it takes them time to figure out a response. Jake Morrison arrived on Earth just as these planning sessions were beginning. He had left his damaged ship at the lunar base and taken a shuttle to the planet's surface. He wanted to meet this Dr. Torres in person. When he walked into the planning room, he found Helen Torres surrounded by charts and computer displays showing battle plans unlike anything he had ever seen. "Commander Morrison," Helen said, looking up from her work, "I'm glad you came. I want to show you something." She led him to a simulation display that showed a typical Zephyrian attack pattern. "Watch this," she said, starting the simulation. "This is how they attack supply convoys. Same formation every time, same spacing between ships, same attack sequence." Jake watched the display. It looked exactly like every Zephyrian attack he had ever seen. "Now watch this," Helen said, starting a new simulation. "This is what happens when we don't give them a normal convoy to attack." The new simulation showed human ships scattered randomly through an asteroid field. When the Zephyrian attack formation approached, they found nothing where the convoy was supposed to be. Instead, human ships appeared from behind asteroids, attacking from unexpected angles. "The Zephyrian formation breaks apart," Helen explained. "Their computers can't handle targets that don't behave according to standard patterns. It takes them crucial seconds to recalculate, and in space combat, seconds can decide everything." Jake stared at the simulation. "This could actually work." "It will work," Ray Thompson said from across the room. "But we need to test it first. We need a real battle where we can try these tactics." Jake thought about his remaining ships, waiting at the lunar base. Most of them were damaged and undermanned. By conventional standards, they were barely able to fight at all. "I have an idea," he said. "There's a Zephyrian patrol group that passes through the Saturn system every few days. They're looking for human survivors fleeing the inner planets. What if we gave them something to find?" Helen smiled. "What did you have in mind? What if we made it look like we were trying to evacuate civilians from one of Saturn's moons? A convoy of transport ships lightly defended, following standard evacuation procedures?" "And when they attack," Ray asked. "When they attack, they'll find out that our transport ships are actually warships in disguise, and our escort vessels are hidden in Saturn's rings." Helen nodded slowly. "It's perfect. They'll be expecting a standard convoy defense. Instead, they'll get something they've never seen before." Nina Foster looked up from her computer. "I can create false sensor readings to make our warships look like civilian transports. And I can mask the real escort ships so they don't show up on enemy scanners at all." "How long do we have to prepare?" Jake asked. The Saturn system looked peaceful from the bridge of the UES Defiance. Jake Morrison watched the rings of the giant planet spin slowly, hiding his escort ships in their shadows. Everything depended on the next few hours. If their plan worked, they might have a chance. If it failed, the war would be over. "Contacts approaching from the outer system," Lieutenant Lisa Grant reported. "Zephyrian patrol group. Right on schedule. 4 cruisers and 2 destroyers." Jake nodded. The enemy was coming exactly as Helen Torres had predicted. Their computers had calculated the most efficient patrol route, and they followed it precisely every time. That predictability was about to become their weakness. "Signal the convoy," Jake ordered. "Begin the evacuation scenario." Across the Saturn system, what looked like a desperate human evacuation was beginning. Transport ships emerged from behind Titan, broadcasting emergency signals about civilian refugees who needed to escape. The ships moved slowly and clumsily, exactly like overloaded civilian vessels would move. But these weren't really transport ships. Nina Foster had worked for 3 days to make the warships look like helpless cargo haulers on enemy sensors. Their weapons were hidden, their armor disguised, and their engines running at low power to seem damaged. War Commander Thekmore studied the reports from his patrol ships with satisfaction. Another group of human refugees trying to flee to the outer planets. His computers had already calculated the most efficient way to destroy them. Standard Attack Pattern 7 would work perfectly. Signal the patrol commander, Thekmore ordered. Standard intercept and destroy. Follow protocol exactly. Light years away on Earth, Helen Torres watched the battle through long-range sensors. This was the first real test of her theories. Around her, the planning room was silent. Everyone knew that if this failed, they would have to surrender to the Zephyrians within days. The Zephyrian patrol ships approached the fake convoy in perfect formation. Their attack pattern was exactly what the human computers had predicted. They would surround the transport ships, demand surrender, and then destroy them when the humans refused. But as the enemy ships moved into position, something unexpected happened. The damaged transport ship in the middle of the convoy suddenly wasn't damaged anymore. Its engines flared to full power, and it accelerated directly at the lead Zephyrian cruiser. "What are they doing?" the Zephyrian patrol commander asked his tactical officer. "This is not standard evacuation behavior." Before anyone could answer, the transport ship opened fire with weapons that weren't supposed to exist. The disguised warship's plasma cannons tore into the Zephyrian cruiser's hull. At the same moment, 4 more transport ships revealed their true nature and began attacking from different directions. The Zephyrian formation began to break apart. Their computers had calculated the perfect response to a standard convoy defense, but this wasn't standard at all. The enemy ships were coming from everywhere at once using attack patterns that made no tactical sense. "Sir, we're taking heavy damage," the Zephyrian tactical officer reported. "Our formation is compromised, requesting new attack orders." The patrol commander stared at his tactical display in confusion. His computers were cycling through thousands of possible battle scenarios, but none of them matched what was happening. The humans were fighting like they had nothing to lose, making attacks that should have left them vulnerable but somehow didn't. That was when the real surprise began. From Saturn's rings came ships that hadn't been there moments before. The human escort vessels had been hiding in the ice and rock, waiting for exactly this moment. They attacked the Zephyrian ships from behind while the enemy was still trying to figure out what the transports were doing. Marcus Chen led the first fighter squadron to emerge from the rings. He had been a street racer before the war, someone who broke traffic laws for fun. Now he applied that same disregard for rules to space combat. "Remember what Dr. Torres said?" Marcus called to his pilots over the radio. "Don't fly like military pilots. Fly like you're trying to escape the police." His fighters scattered in all directions, weaving between the larger ships in patterns that looked completely random. The Zephyrian point defense systems couldn't track them because they weren't following any recognizable attack formation. Emma Rodriguez commanded another squadron that had been practicing what they called magic tricks. Her ships would appear to be heading in one direction, then suddenly change course and attack from somewhere else entirely. They used electronic warfare equipment to create false sensor readings, making one ship look like 3 or 3 ships look like 1. "Now you see me," Emma muttered as her ship seemed to vanish from enemy sensors, only to reappear behind a Zephyrian destroyer. "Now you don't." The battle became chaos. The Zephyrian ships tried to reform their perfect formations, but the humans wouldn't let them. Every time the enemy began to organize, another surprise attack would break them apart again. Captain Danny Brooks watched the battle from his hidden position near one of Saturn's smaller moons. His ship, the UES Shadow, had a special job in this fight. While everyone else was creating confusion, he was looking for the enemy command ship. "There," he said to Sergeant Kelly Price. "That cruiser in the center. It's the one giving orders to the others." "Too bad we can't get close enough to board it," Kelly replied. "They'd see us coming a mile away." Danny smiled. "Who says they'll see us coming?" He had learned something important from studying the Zephyrians. They were so focused on big, obvious threats that they sometimes missed small, quiet ones. The U.S. Shadow was very small and very quiet. "Tim," Danny called to his communication specialist. "Can you make us look like a piece of debris from the battle?" Corporal Tim Walsh worked at his console. I can make our sensor signature match a chunk of metal, sir, but we'll have to drift toward them without using engines. Perfect, Danny said. Kelly, get ready for a boarding operation. While the main battle raged around them, the UES Shadow drifted toward the Zephyrian command ship like just another piece of space junk. The enemy was too busy trying to deal with the chaotic fighter attack to notice one small object among the debris. On Earth, Helen Torres watched the battle reports. With growing excitement, her theories were working. The Zephyrians were losing because they couldn't adapt to tactics they had never seen before. Look at their response times, she said to Admiral Stone. Every time we do something unexpected, it takes them longer to react. Their computers have to calculate new solutions, but we're not giving them time. Ray Thompson nodded grimly. It's like fighting someone who's never been in a real fight before. They know all the rules, but they don't know what to do when the other guy doesn't follow them. The tide of the battle turned when Danny Brooks and his team successfully boarded the Zephyrian command ship. While the alien crew was focused on the space battle outside, 3 humans in stealth suits crept through their corridors. Their security is terrible, Kelly whispered as they moved toward the bridge. They never expected anyone to get inside their ship. Why would they? Danny replied. Boarding actions aren't part of civilized warfare. No one's supposed to fight inside spaceships. They reached the bridge just as the Zephyrian commander was trying to reorganize his scattered fleet. The aliens were so focused on their tactical displays that they didn't notice the humans entering their command center until it was too late. Nobody move, Danny said in the few words of Zephyrian language he had learned. Your ship is captured. The alien commander turned around, his black eyes wide with shock. This wasn't supposed to be possible. Enemy soldiers weren't supposed to be able to board warships during battle. You cannot do this, the commander said in accented English. There are rules about boarding actions. Proper procedures must be followed. We're not following your rules anymore, Danny replied. Order your ships to withdraw or we'll destroy this vessel with all of us inside. The Zephyrian commander looked at his tactical officer, then back at the humans. These weren't civilized opponents who would negotiate and follow proper surrender protocols. These were beings who seemed willing to die just to cause damage. Signal the fleet, the commander said quietly. General withdrawal. The Zephyrian ships began to pull back, their perfect formations finally broken completely. For the first time, in 3 years, human forces had won a clear victory against the alien invaders. But the celebration was short-lived. Long-range sensors detected something that made everyone's blood run cold. The main Zephyrian fleet was accelerating toward Earth, and they were bringing everything they had. War Commander Thekmore had received the reports from the Saturn system with growing anger. The humans had violated every principle of civilized warfare. They had used deception, fought without honor, and boarded a warship during active combat. Such behavior could not be tolerated. Signal the High Command, Thekmore ordered. Request permission to begin final assault protocols. The humans have proven they cannot be civilized. They must be eliminated completely. On Earth, Helen Torres received the news of their victory with mixed feelings. They had proven that unconventional tactics could work, but they had also made the enemy very angry. The plan Helen Torres presented to the Emergency Council was unlike anything in the history of warfare. She stood at the center of the room, surrounded by holographic displays showing Earth, the Moon, and the approaching Zephyrian fleet. Her hands shook as she explained what she wanted to do. We turn the Moon into a weapon, she said simply. We install massive engines on the far side and push it out of orbit. When the Zephyrian fleet arrives, they'll face a choice: retreat or be destroyed by our own moon. The room fell completely silent. President Hayes stared at her as if she had lost her mind. Dr. Torres, you're talking about destroying our own solar system. The moon keeps our oceans stable. Without it, Earth becomes uninhabitable. Earth is already going to become uninhabitable if we lose this war, Helen replied. At least this way we take them with us. Admiral Stone leaned forward in her chair. Even if we could move the moon, which I doubt, the Zephyrians would just destroy it before it reached them. Their plasma weapons could break it apart easily. Not if we're fighting them at the same time, Helen said. The moon doesn't have to hit their ships directly. It just has to create enough chaos and debris to make the battle impossible to control. In that kind of environment, their computers won't help them. It will be pure survival, and humans are very good at surviving. Dr. Benjamin Clark was studying the technical displays. The engineering challenges alone would be impossible. Moving the moon would require more power than our entire civilization produces. We don't need to move it fast, Helen explained. Just fast enough to reach the enemy fleet when they arrive, and we have help. She gestured to a man sitting quietly in the corner. Tony Mitchell has been working in the asteroid mining facilities for 15 years. He knows how to move large objects in space. Tony Mitchell stood up slowly. He was a big man with rough hands and a weathered face. He had spent most of his life working with heavy machinery in dangerous places. "It's not impossible," he said in a gravelly voice. "Difficult, yes. Dangerous, absolutely. But not impossible." "You're all insane," President Hayes said. "We can't destroy the moon to win a war." "We're not destroying it," Helen replied. "We're using it. And if we're going to die anyway, shouldn't we make it count?" While the politicians argued, the military was already making preparations. Jake Morrison had returned to his ship and was working with his remaining fleet commanders to develop new tactics. The victory at Saturn had given them confidence, but they all knew the final battle would be much harder. "We have 28 ships left," Jake told the assembled captains. "The Zephyrians have over 300. Even with our new tactics, we can't win a straight fight." Captain Danny Brooks raised his hand. "What if we don't fight a straight fight? What if we make it so confused that nobody knows what's happening?" "That's exactly what I was thinking," Jake replied. "We're going to turn this entire solar system into a battlefield. Every asteroid, every satellite, every piece of space junk becomes a potential weapon or hiding place." Lieutenant Lisa Grant was coordinating with civilian volunteers who had never fought in space before. Street racers, stunt pilots, computer hackers, and former criminals were all being trained to fly military spacecraft. It should have been a disaster, but somehow it was working. "The key is to think like troublemakers instead of soldiers," Lisa explained to a group of new pilots. "Military tactics are predictable. Criminal tactics are not. The Zephyrians can't plan for something they've never seen before." Marcus Chen was teaching fighter pilots how to fly like they were running from the police. "Forget everything you learned in flight school," he told them. "In a real chase, you don't follow traffic rules. You go through places you're not supposed to go and do things that aren't supposed to work." Emma Rodriguez had her own group learning what she called space magic. They practiced making their ships appear and disappear on enemy sensors, creating false targets and confusing enemy computers with electronic tricks. "The enemy thinks space combat is like a chess game," Emma explained. "We're going to show them that it's more like a street fight where anything goes." Meanwhile, on the far side of the moon, the most ambitious engineering project in human history was beginning. Tony Mitchell supervised teams of miners and construction workers as they installed massive fusion engines into the lunar surface. The work was dangerous and exhausting, but everyone knew what was at stake. "We need to be very careful with the placement," Tony explained to his crew chiefs. "If we put the engines in the wrong spots, we'll just break the moon into pieces instead of moving it." The work continued around the clock. Fusion reactors that normally powered entire cities were being connected to engines designed to move asteroids. It was like trying to build a spaceship the size of a small planet in just 2 days. Dr. Clark arrived at the lunar construction site to oversee the technical aspects of the project. He still thought the plan was insane, but he had to admit it might actually work. "The math is just barely possible," he told Tony Mitchell. "We can generate enough thrust to move the moon, but we'll only get one chance. If the engines fail or break apart under the stress, that's it. Then we better make sure they don't fail," Tony replied grimly. Back on Earth, Helen Torres was dealing with a different kind of problem. Reports were coming in from human colonies throughout the galaxy. The Zephyrians were not just sending their fleet to Earth. They were systematically destroying every human settlement they could find. "New Geneva is gone," Admiral Stone reported during an emergency briefing. "Complete orbital bombardment. No survivors." The news hit everyone hard. New Geneva had been home to 2 million people, including many families of the soldiers now preparing to defend Earth. The Zephyrians were making it clear that this was not just a military conquest. It was extinction. They're trying to break our morale, Helen said quietly. They want us to surrender before they arrive. Is it working? Jake Morrison asked. Helen looked around the room at the faces of soldiers and civilians who had been working without sleep for days. They all looked exhausted and scared, but none of them looked ready to give up. No, she said firmly. I think it's making us angrier. The final preparations continued as long-range sensors detected the approaching Zephyrian fleet. War Commander Thekmore was bringing every ship the Empire had. Battle cruisers, destroyers, carrier vessels, and massive dreadnoughts that could destroy planets by themselves. They're not taking any chances this time, Admiral Stone observed. This is the entire military might of the Zephyrian Empire. Good, Helen replied. That means when we beat them, the war is over. When we beat them? President Hayes asked. Helen, they outnumber us 15-1. Their ships are bigger and better armed than ours. How can you be so confident? Helen smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. Because they're still thinking like this is a normal war. They're bringing their entire fleet to fight us properly according to all the rules of civilized warfare. They have no idea what we're actually planning to do. On the lunar surface, the final engine installations were being completed. Tony Mitchell's teams had worked miracles of engineering, but the stress was showing on everyone. 3 workers had died in construction accidents, and several others were injured. The engines are ready, Tony reported to Mission Control. But I have to warn you, we've never tested anything like this before. We don't know if the moon will hold together under this kind of stress. Will it work? Dr. Clark asked. It should work, Tony replied. But should and will are 2 different things when you're trying to move something that weighs 73 quintillion tons. Jake Morrison made final preparations with his fleet. The human ships had been modified beyond recognition. Some looked like cargo haulers, others appeared to be damaged hulks drifting in space. All of them were disguised to hide their true capabilities. Remember the plan, Jake told his captains. We don't reveal ourselves until the moon engines fire. Let them think they're attacking a broken, helpless fleet. When they get confident and move in close, that's when we spring the trap. Captain Danny Brooks had his own special assignment. The UES Shadow would be hidden inside a fake asteroid, waiting to strike at the Zephyrian command ship when the battle began. It was an incredibly dangerous mission, but it was also crucial to the plan. If we can capture or destroy their flagship, their whole fleet might break apart, Danny explained to his crew. These guys don't improvise well. Take away their central command, and they'll be lost. The night before the battle, Helen Torres couldn't sleep. She walked through the corridors of the lunar base checking on the final preparations. Everywhere she looked, she saw people working with desperate determination. They all knew this might be humanity's last day. She found Jake Morrison standing alone in the observation deck, looking out at the Earth hanging in the black sky above them. The blue planet looked peaceful and beautiful, nothing like a world that was about to become the center of the most important battle in galactic history. Having second thoughts? Helen asked quietly. About the plan? No, Jake replied. About what comes after if we somehow win. We're about to do things that will change how every species in the galaxy thinks about warfare. We're going to break rules that have existed for thousands of years. The Zephyrian fleet approached Earth like a dark cloud that blocked out the stars. War Commander Thekmore watched the tactical displays with satisfaction as his 300 ships moved into perfect attack formation. The human homeworld hung before them, blue and helpless. Sir, we're detecting the human fleet, his tactical officer reported. 26 ships, most showing damage. They're maintaining defensive positions around the moon. Thekmore nodded. It was exactly what his computers had predicted. The humans would make their final stand protecting their home planet, following the same defensive strategies that had failed them for 3 years. Signal all ships, Thekmore ordered. Begin standard assault pattern. Target the defensive fleet first, then proceed to planetary bombardment. But on the hidden side of the moon, Tony Mitchell was making final preparations for something the galaxy had never seen before. Massive fusion engines, each one the size of a city building, were ready to fire. The lunar surface trembled as power flowed through systems that were never meant to work together. "All teams, clear the firing zones," Tony spoke into his radio. "Engine ignition in 60 seconds. Dr. Benjamin Clark watched the countdown from the control center buried deep inside the moon. Every calculation said this should work, but he had never been more scared in his life. They were about to attempt something that could destroy their own planet if it went wrong. 30 seconds, Tony announced. "Everyone hold on." Jake Morrison waited aboard the UES Defiance, watching the enemy fleet approach. His ship looked like a damaged wreck drifting near the moon, but hidden inside were weapons and crew ready for the fight of their lives. Around him, 25 other human ships played the same deception. "Remember," Jake told his crew over the curse, "we don't move until the moon engines fire. Let them get close, let them think they've already won." The Zephyrian fleet moved closer, their plasma weapons charging for the attack that would end human resistance forever. Thekmor felt a moment of satisfaction. This war had taken longer than expected, but it was finally ending properly. 10 seconds, to weapons range, his tactical officer reported. That was when Tony Mitchell spoke the words that changed everything. "Fire all engines. Now." The far side of the moon erupted in light as dozens of massive fusion engines ignited simultaneously. The lunar surface cracked and shook as unimaginable forces pushed against the ancient rock. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the moon began to move. It started slowly, just a slight change in orbit that the Zephyrian sensors barely detected. But as the engines reached full power, the moon's movement became obvious. The huge satellite was accelerating directly toward the enemy fleet. "What is happening?" Thekmor demanded, staring at his tactical display in confusion. "Moons do not move. This is impossible." His computers tried to calculate a response to something they had never been programmed to handle. A planetary satellite. Being used as a weapon was beyond anything in their databases. The entire Zephyrian formation began to break apart as ship commanders panicked. "Sir, the moon is on a collision course with our fleet," the tactical officer reported, his voice shaking. "Impact in 18 minutes. "Destroy it," Thekmor ordered. "All ships concentrate fire on the lunar surface." The Zephyrian fleet opened fire on the moon with every weapon they had. Plasma beams that could destroy mountains struck the lunar surface, creating explosions that could be seen from Earth. But the moon was too big and moving too fast. Their weapons carved huge craters in its surface but couldn't stop its movement. That was when Jake Morrison gave the signal that began the real battle. "All ships, drop disguises. Attack pattern chaos. Show them what humans really fight like." The damaged wrecks around the moon suddenly came alive. Hidden weapons emerged from fake cargo pods. Ships that had seemed powerless fired their engines and accelerated toward the enemy. What had looked like a broken fleet became a swarm of attackers moving in patterns that no computer could predict. Marcus Chen led his fighter squadron out of the moon's shadow, his ships weaving between the larger vessels like motorcycles racing through traffic. "Remember, guys, we're not military pilots today. We're crazy people with nothing to lose." His fighters scattered in all directions, attacking targets that made no tactical sense. They fired at enemy weapons instead of engines, targeted sensor arrays instead of bridges, and flew through formations instead of around them. The Zephyrian point defense systems couldn't track them because they weren't following any logical attack pattern. Emma Rodriguez brought her squadron up from behind the enemy fleet, her ships appearing on sensors where they shouldn't be able to exist. Her electronic warfare equipment made one ship look like 10, while 10 ships vanished completely from enemy displays. "Magic trick number 1, Emma announced as her ship seemed to disappear, only to reappear inside the enemy formation. "Now you see me. Magic trick number 2, now I'm behind you." The space around Earth became chaos. The moon continued its impossible journey toward the Zephyrian fleet, while human ships attacked from every direction at once. The enemy tried to maintain their formations, but it was hopeless. Every time they grouped together, another wave of unpredictable attacks would break them apart. Captain Danny Brooks guided the UES Shadow through the confusion, looking for Thekmor's flagship. His ship was disguised as a piece of debris from the moon, drifting slowly toward the massive Zephyrian command vessel. There, he told Sergeant Kelly Price. The big one with all the communication arrays, that's where their commander is hiding. How do we get aboard? Kelly asked. They'll see us coming. Not if we make them think we're already dead, Danny replied with a grim smile. The UES shadow suddenly exploded in a brilliant flash of light. At least that's what the Zephyrian sensors detected. In reality, Danny had used a technique borrowed from stage magicians, creating a fake explosion while his real ship slipped away in the confusion. War Commander Thekmore watched his perfect battle plan collapse into madness. The humans were fighting like wild animals, attacking everything at once without any apparent strategy. His computers couldn't predict their movements because there was no logic to predict. Sir, we're losing formation cohesion, his tactical officer reported. Our ships can't maintain proper spacing with that moon approaching, and the human attacks from all directions. Reform the fleet, Thekmore ordered desperately. Follow Emergency Protocol 7. But before his ships could respond, new alarms began sounding throughout his flagship. Somehow, impossibly, there were humans aboard his vessel. Danny Brooks and his team moved through the Zephyrian command ship like shadows. The alien crew was so focused on the battle outside that they didn't notice the intruders until it was too late. Bridge is just ahead, Kelly whispered as they crept through the corridors. Security is light. They never expected anyone to board their flagship during battle. They reached the bridge just as Thekmore was trying to rally his scattered fleet. The war commander turned around to find 3 humans pointing weapons at him and his crew. You cannot be here, Thekmore said in shock. This violates every principle of civilized warfare. We stopped being civilized when you tried to make us extinct, Danny replied. Order your fleet to surrender or we destroy this ship with all of us aboard. Thekmore stared at the human soldier. These beings truly were insane. They were willing to die just to cause damage to their enemies. It was a level of savagery that no civilized species could understand. Outside the flagship, the battle raged on. The moon was now only minutes away from impact, its massive bulk filling the view screens of every ship in the system. Pieces of lunar rock broken off by Zephyrian weapons were creating a debris field that made navigation impossible. Human ships continued their chaotic attacks, darting between enemy vessels like angry wasps. They fought with a desperation and creativity that the Zephyrian computers couldn't match. Every attack was different, every maneuver unpredictable. Sir, we have to retreat, the Zephyrian tactical officer pleaded. If we stay here, the moon will destroy us all. Thekmore looked at the humans holding weapons on his bridge, then at the tactical display showing his fleet being torn apart by impossible tactics. His entire career had been built on the idea that warfare was a science, something that could be calculated and controlled. These humans had proven him wrong. They had turned war into an art form, something chaotic and unpredictable, and utterly destructive. They were willing to destroy their own moon just to defeat an enemy. Signal the fleet, Thekmore said quietly. General retreat. All ships, withdraw immediately. Sir? His tactical officer asked in surprise. You heard me, Thekmore replied, never taking his eyes off Danny Brooks. We retreat. The humans have won. The Zephyrian fleet began to pull back, their perfect formations completely broken. Ships fled in all directions, desperate to escape the approaching moon and the swarms of human fighters that continued to harass them. As the enemy retreated, Tony Mitchell fired the moon's engines one last time, slowing its movement just enough to avoid hitting Earth's atmosphere. The massive satellite settled into a new orbit, closer to the planet and surrounded by a ring of debris that would circle Earth forever. Jake Morrison watched the last Zephyrian ships disappear into hyperspace, taking news of their defeat back to the Empire.